In this lesson, we'll begin the process of rigging our pod racer. The scene is rigging start in your project files. So we're starting off where Justin has left off, having textured this really cool pod racer for us. Alright, so let's say we go ahead and get started with this control rig. Now before we start building the controls, we first need to ask ourselves why. Why spend the time going through this process? Well, for one, it adds clarity to the animator as far as what should be controlled and what should not be controlled. So right now, if I were to go ahead and select this pod and go ahead and press the J key so we could see see our selection brackets. Alright, right now if we were to select the pod and start to move it around, notice we're moving the entire pod. And right now we're not getting any natural movement out of this at all. Ideally what we'd want is independent control over the cab body, over the engines, and even some control over the turning of the engine fans. So we can really bring this pod racer to life through animation. If we just were to animate it this way, we would have some very rigid animation, and it would break the illusion of this pod moving through an environment. Alright, so that's one reason why we want to go ahead and build these controls and set up this control system. Now, even if we were to go ahead and, let's say, select this pod and go ahead and go to groups and open the group, alright, so we can get to the individual sections here, still there's no real clarity as to what the animator can and cannot control, or what the animator should and should not control. For example, alright, one might guess that, yeah, we should be able to just go ahead and control this pod. But notice, what about the cables? Should the animator be able to select the cables and start to move those around? So you get the idea of why we want to set up what are called control curves. Again, for clarity. And also so we don't directly add any connections to our models, so we can go ahead and keep them as clean as possible. Alright, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and press the G key to turn on the grid. This will help us to snap our controls or our shapes to grid, so we can later on align them to these different objects. Alright, now just as a quick note, if we were to go ahead and, let's say, select the cab body, we can use the plus and minus key to increase or decrease our manipulator gizmo size. So find that to be very helpful. In case you're working with a small gizmo, go ahead and increase the size with the plus key. Okay, now with that said, let's say we go ahead and start to build our control system. Alright, so what we want is, again, individual control over our cab body, okay, and over the engines. And at the same time, we want a global control, and we're getting that now with this main group, the pod racer group. And this is going to be great because later on we'll be able to connect this to a trajectory or motion path to get some really fun animations out of this pod. Alright, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go ahead and start with our first task here. And we'll start by creating a control for our cab body. What I like to do is go ahead and, under the create panel, use a shape. And here we'll go ahead and use a circle. Alright, so let's go ahead and draw out this circle shape. Okay, and I'll go ahead and right click. And that will exit our circle creation tool. Okay, so we have this circle. One cool thing about Max is that we can actually go ahead and attach multiple shapes to one shape. So to do this, right now, if we were to head over to the modify panel, this is just a circle shape. But if we were to right click with the object selected and go to convert to and choose editable spline, notice now the shape is much more, and we have much more settings we can choose from. Okay, so before we actually go ahead and attach a shape, let's go ahead and create another shape from this. What I'm going to go ahead and do is go to the rotate tool, pressing the E key. We'll hold down shift, and now we can go ahead and rotate, and notice we're actually cloning another shape from our original circle. Now, looking at the yellow numbers, that gives us an indication of how many degrees we're rotating this by. Now, let's say if we try to get this to 90 degrees, well, that's kind of tricky. It's about 90.45. And notice we can go ahead and copy this if we like. I'm actually going to go ahead and cancel that to show you something. If we press the A key, or go to the toolbar and turn on angle snap. Now watch this. We can hold down shift and start to rotate, and now we're rotating 5 by 5 degree increments, which is great because now we can get to a perfect 90 degrees, or in my case, negative 90. Great. So from here we can go ahead and make a copy. Excellent. So now we have this shape that will go ahead and conform to our ship for clarity. We should always have our controls in some way conform to the object that they are controlling so that the animator knows exactly what this controller is responsible for. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead now and attach one shape to another. I'll select our original shape. We could actually select both, or either or I should say, but I'll go ahead and select the original shape. From there, under the Modify panel, we want to head down to Geometry. Underneath Geometry, notice we have the Attach tool. So now let's go ahead and choose Attach and choose the next shape. And there we have it. Now these shapes are combined into one, which is great. Okay, excellent. So from here, I'd like to go ahead and rename this. I'm going to go ahead and call this CC for control curve underscore cab 01. Okay, now this naming convention, I really like to use this because it helps to add clarity, and it also helps us to find things in our scene. For example, if we ever need to find all control curves, we can press the H key, which will bring up our selection window, and then we can go ahead and find things that way. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that out, and we will be using that later on when it comes to finding certain things for enveloping. Alright, and that may sound kind of foreign, but we'll get to that discussion a little bit later. But for right now, let's say we go ahead and stop the lesson, and in the next lesson we'll go ahead and continue setting up our controls for the pod racer.